Hello. Difficult subject today to express it. I'm just going to speak my mind and say what I feel. And it's mainly about betrayal. Betrayal of oneself and betrayal of others, those of when we betray those of our communities. And I'll start with just the same by Juvenal from the 1st century BC. A time, he said, when honesty is praised, but honest men freeze. And about those in power who betray their people, he says that nevertheless, apart from all the goodies that they might get at the end, their innards sweat at the thought of their secret guilt, their consciences cold with crime. That's Juvenal. A few days ago, I posted a video about Black Americans that I felt that they were being betrayed by their leaders, and I gave my reasons for that. And I was actually asking the question, after the suffering and the humiliation that you have suffered, how can you put up with leaders from your own community who are siding, it seems, with what many years ago perhaps you would have called the oppressors? I want to expand on that a little bit. But it's not only Black Americans. I also want to address what the Jewish people are going through at the moment. The Jewish people who are not in favor of what is happening in the Middle East. The Jewish people, either secular or following their religion, opposed to what is happening, and how difficult that must be, because they're going not only against the powerful and their aims, but also perhaps in their own communities, in their own families. I'm sure that there are many families who are divided, and it can't be easy to say that you're not supporting this particular country. But it's not only the blacks and the Jews, it's also the rest of us. And that takes us to the political realm of our leaders betraying our sovereignty and being subjugated, or they have subjugated themselves to the aims of a group that is not representing their own particular country, ignoring the people. So I'm going to deal with those three examples. I'm going to start with Black Americans. And when I talk about Black Americans, you're going to say, what the hell do you have to say about Black Americans? You're neither American, you're not black. Okay, I know, but I am a human being, and I understand suffering and humiliation that I might have experienced, you don't know. And the feeling of impotency and so on, and betrayal and lack of trust is similar. You see, this is my difficulty, and that is why I feel so strongly about it, and why I even dare to speak about something that perhaps some of you will think that I have no right to speak of. But you see, the picture in my mind is, and the picture that stays with many of us, is there at the United Nations voting on something that is happening, as you know, in the Middle East, and trying to say that it is wrong and it has to stop. And the picture, the optics, is that of a black American woman with a hand up, the only one. At the same time that South Africa, who have experience to live in this sort of system of separating human beings, according to, in that case, it was color, but it could be religion, it could be whatever it is, separating other people and treating them as subhuman. And of course, South Africa understood that and expressed its disapproval. And so I have this image on my mind of a black woman being the only one who says, go ahead, nothing wrong with this situation. I'm trying to explain it to myself, and I can give reasons for that. The first reason is that she has a job to do. She has been appointed to do this job, which is to represent her country, or her government at any rate. And it's not up to her and her own beliefs that, you know, she has to vote according to her own opinions or her own beliefs. She's there representing a government. And I could understand that. And I don't know whether this lady agrees with what she's voting against or not. It is not for me to know. She's just doing her job, and I can understand that part of the argument. The problem that I have is that surely she knows in her bones and in her blood what it means to be subdued and subjugated, not herself, but her predecessors. And so there is a moral question here, you see. It goes beyond doing a job. If you can do it, how can you do it? Because if not, if you felt very strongly about it, you would have to resign and just say, give me another job. I cannot do this. It goes against every, fiber of my body to do so. The problem is that she is not the only one. You see, we remember Colin Powell shaking the little powder, which was just ordinary powder, there with the Iraq War. And there is Condoleezza Rice and Lloyd Austin and so many others. And my question is, and I have no right to ask this question of them, I'm just thinking out loud for myself, trying to understand how can this be, that they go along with it, that they do not resign. That is the question mark I have on my mind. It would be easier if you just say, well, okay, so I'm betraying myself and my own feelings and my own thoughts and my own opinions, but look, I have a chance here for a career and, the rest of it. And I am not, it took me a long time to get to this, and I'm not prepared to sacrifice my future career for a matter of principle. I can also understand that logically speaking, I can understand it. But that is only if you take yourself, just yourself, into consideration. Because surely then you have to think of your own people and your own community. And so it's not a question of betraying yourself, but of betraying your people too. And how has this come about? What happened here? And I have to go back to a point in 1995 when I think that my dear friends, Black Americans, lost their way or lost their innocence. Now, what do I mean by innocence? No. You know how we say that, for example, when President Kennedy was assassinated, that America from that moment on lost its innocence. It's an allegory, it's a turn of phrase, a figure of speech, to say that we were so, in a sense, betrayed that we became cynical, and then we lost the trust, as it were. And why do I say 1995? The O.J. Simpson case. All Americans know about this, but if you allow me for 1 or 2 minutes to explain for those who are not Americans and don't know who O.J. Simpson was. He passed away a few months ago, I believe, rest in peace. But I'm using that case as an example. No disrespect to him or his family or his memory. O.J. Simpson, many of you, perhaps some of you will be too young to remember if you are outside the United States, but O.J. Simpson was a very famous American footballer. By 1995, he had retired, I believe, but he was very famous and very popular. And he was actually starting a career in the movies, and he was doing a lot of commercials on television. Very much loved figure. Anyway, to cut a long story short, he was divorcing or was already divorced from his wife. I'm not sure. I remember at that time I was living in America, and the trial of which I'm going to talk about, I used to watch it every night. But anyway, his wife was one time celebrating, I believe it was her birthday, at a restaurant near her home. They live separately by now. And she received a telephone call from, I believe, the restaurant where she had been dining, or her mother, something like that she had forgotten her glasses. And so one of the waiters said, "Don't worry, because, on my way I can drop them." Okay. That happened. The next day, both of them had been murdered outside her home. Murdered in such a manner that she was practically decapitated. And so was he. They were not lovers, Mrs. Simpson and the waiter. He just happened to come along, being, in the wrong place at the wrong time. He happened to come along when the actual murder was taking place. He fought. There were signs. Anyway, so long story short, the police found evidence of blood in Mr. Simpson's car, drops of blood into his house, all kinds of things. Okay, so it seemed that they had enough evidence to arrest him and charge him with murder. There was a lot of evidence that suggested that he had done it, what had happened before, and so on. But one glove was found with blood in near his home and so on, but only one. And it was only through the investigation and after the trial, that a policeman found the other glove, also with blood, Mrs. Simpson's blood, and so on. But it had been out there in the elements and had dried up, but they were able to see that it was, the other glove. And okay. And then something happened during the trial. And it was perhaps to me the first time that the race card was brought into the trial. And so the lawyers for Mr. Simpson said that the policeman who had recovered the glove was a racist. In the past, that he had made some comments to someone. This was before, iPhones and when you could record. But anyway, someone said that he had made some comments, which they said that they were racist and so on. And then the lawyer asked Mr. Simpson to put the glove on. The glove had shrunk, and he couldn't, he fitted it in, but it was obviously not very well. He couldn't quite put his hand into the whole glove. And so the logo, as it were, was, if it doesn't fit, you must acquit. We learned later on that Mr. Simpson actually suffered from inflammation of the joints, and he hadn't taken that medicine for a while. So the fact that the glove had been out there for days, or perhaps even weeks, and the fact that he had not taken the inflammation for joints, it made it difficult for him to put his whole hand. But that was a way of putting doubt on the jury's mind as to whether he had actually committed the crime. The jury was composed of only one white person, and the rest were black people, black Americans. And the white lady said at the end that at first she had had doubts, but she felt very intimidated for being the only one. Anyway, what happened was that the reason why I say this is I think something happened that day, because practically everyone saw that Mr. Simpson was guilty. But black Americans did not. So the country was divided, separated between, it was explained like this, all white people thought that he was guilty and all black people thought that he was innocent. All right, so this is my point. I don't think that black Americans thought that he was innocent. The evidence was all there. I think something else took place. Something that perhaps, I don't know, but it seemed that had never happened before in this scale, and that was, no, you're not going to punish one of us, a successful football player, a successful man. In other words, it was payback time, as it were. Something like that. I think people will have to delve into their own consciousness, but I think even black people knew in their heart of hearts that he had committed the crime. And this is my point, that they chose to go against justice for the sake of fill in the blank. Whatever the reasons were, perhaps they felt personally attacked. Whatever the reasons were, the evidence was there. And so, at that moment, when the question of race and color of skin was more important than justice, something changed. And from that moment on, I think that many black Americans took that road of not necessarily what is just and fair, but what I can get away with. To me, it was a breaking point. A breaking point that instead of acknowledging one's suffering and humiliation in the past and dealing with it, as South Africa has done, to use that rather than as a tool of redemption, as it were, to use it for attack. Don't know whether I'm explaining myself very well here. It is a difficult thing to explain. So what we have now is many black leaders who get there to the top, perhaps unfairly. Perhaps there were others who, not necessarily all the time, but certainly in many cases, they sort of jumped the queue or cut the line, whatever you want to say, because of the color of skin. And so now we have black leaders who are put there, and forgive me for saying this, but as if they were paraded to the rest of the world. The jobs where one has to defend the powerful that once repressed them. They are put in a position where they have to defend the oppressors. Let's use that word. And they do it. That is that is what I find. I am almost offended myself. Why are you offended yourself? You're not black, you're not American. I know, but I do have a basic sense of fairness and justice. And I started thinking about this. I had another video. I'll probably put it at the end of this video, but because I heard, I don't know that this is true or not, that in New York there is going to be a celebration of, is it Independence Day or something like that? That not the Jewish community, but the Zionists, let's say, the ones in favor of, are celebrating it's not independence, but the birth of Israel, and they have invited. I saw it in one or two videos. They have invited a group or a band of black singers and dancers and so on as part of the celebrations. And if this is true, if this is so, why would they agree to be paraded celebrating the birth of a country that is engaging in the suffering and the humiliation that South Africa experienced? Do they not know? Okay, so there we are. Let me move on now to the question of the Jewish people. Again, I'm not Jewish. I just have an opinion and speak my mind. It's the same thing, you see, that the group of people, of a community, sometimes the whole of the community pays for the sins of the leaders, as it were. And I think that it has to be, as I said at the beginning, it has to be so difficult at the moment to be a Jewish person who in your own conscience know that you cannot possibly agree with what is going on, and how painful that might be, because the rest of us can complain and say, but to them it has to touch a nerve. It has to be particularly difficult. And to see so many of them, young people too, to see so many of them speaking up, excuse me, so many rabbis and so many Orthodox Jews and so many secular Jews also. And I say that they're paying, as we all do. It is sometimes the innocent who pay, the great majority of the community that pays for the sins of those at the top. And it seems to be the case with the Jewish people, you see, with the history in Europe, where they were expelled so many times from many different countries. And you see, many have argued, well, why? Because you just hated them because they were Jews and they were not Christians. That's too easy. The reason was, if you can go back all those centuries, Jewish people, I call them once the first immigrants. Okay, so they went to different countries, dispersed, and they kept together, all right? The idea that it was the host country that forced them to stay together is not the whole truth. It was them themselves that felt fortified and empowered, and their rabbis also told them to keep together. There was nothing wrong about them keeping together. Okay, fine. In the course of history, the church, one of the things that before capitalism came along, before the Reformation and Protestantism, which gave way to the capitalist free market economy, there was such thing as called usury, yes, charging interest in Christian communities was not allowed. It was seen as a kind of a sin. It was seen as taking advantage of one in need, as it were. So it was obviously frowned upon by the church. The Jewish people could do it because they were not Christian and they were not under the moral guidance of the Catholic Church. And indeed, they had, I'm sure that they felt a duty to, if you can multiply, if you have $1 and you can multiply it into, to $2, that is what you should do rather than bury it. Yeah. So there was nothing, I'm sure, in any way immoral about it. But the fact is that the situation on the ground was such that they could, not all of them, but many of them, the leaders, the ones who rose and became wealthy, they could actually amass fortunes much more easily than their counterparts under Christian morals. Because at that time it was not free enterprise money business. Wealth was land, the old aristocracy and gentry. Your wealth was in land, not necessarily on business. That came later. Yeah. So what happened is that in a community you would have always a certain amount of people becoming very, very wealthy because people at the bottom understood that they were not under the same moral guidance. Okay, that is the people at the bottom. I have one video about this. The people at the top, the kings and the aristocracies, had no problem because they needed money themselves and they would borrow it from them, yeah, to have wars and to all kinds of things. So the problem that arose with the Jewish people in European countries did not come, the resentment did not come from the leaders, but it came from down below. That's a long story. But what happened when that resentment grew to that point where they were victims of violence? Okay. The people who suffered were the people who were just ordinary people who were expelled. The leaders who had benefited from it did not suffer as much. They had their wealth, or they converted, and so on. Anyway, so what is happening now is that again, we know the difference between, I know at least, the difference between being Jewish and being Zionist, or the difference between the Jewish religion and Zionism and so on. I didn't at the very beginning. I thought it was kind of more or less the same thing. I didn't think anything. But the problem is that the two things, whether people are aware that they're different things or not, nevertheless, it's going to be, if someone in the Jewish community is going to suffer out of this, it's going to be a lot of Jews who might actually be against what is happening, because people are just going to put the two things together. In their mind, yes, okay, they're separate, but then people are going to start talking about the Jews, you see. So they're going to suffer the consequences of something that not only have they not done, but they're actually against. So I think that they're being betrayed too by a certain portion, small, of their own. Okay, so how about the rest of us? This is taking us to politics, really. In Europe, I feel we're being betrayed too by our leaders and our politicians. How so? Oh my goodness. How so? Something happened in the 90s with the freeing and the deregulation of finance that actually changed the world. Clinton and Blair used to call it the third way. And so the whole thing about globalism and international finance and all that, okay? And now global governance, all those things, okay? Now, Europe was very happy, the European leaders were very happy to be joined, obviously, to the United States at the time, sort of joined at the hip, as it were, because they felt that if, although we didn't speak of empire at the time, they felt that by joining the United States, the empire was not only the American empire, but it was this them also partaking of the benefits of that empire. So the Americans would put the muscle, would put the bases on, all over the world, would spend money on NATO. They did, as it were, the hard work. And European nations were actually sitting pretty because they didn't pay so much. They didn't have all that. But nevertheless, we could keep money for ourselves, and have things like free health service, free education. In those days, free everything. So the Americans were putting the money and the muscle, and the Europeans were sitting pretty. Hey, this is quite a good deal. And the Americans thought, well, yes, but there is no such thing as a free lunch. And so now they are, of course, joined in this. I think the global governance is coming apart, but in any case, these sort of powerful financial interests, okay, and they have to be with them rather than representing their own people and their own sovereignty. And no one gets to politics and positions of power unless this minority at the top says he or she is okay, and they know whom to choose. So we are kind of feeling betrayed too. I was just going to give you an example now about a country, Argentina, and what is happening there. I also have another video, very short video about that. But I have found out more about what is happening and the new president, Javier Milei. And apparently things are worse than people originally thought. I have been following Argentinian channels, news and YouTube videos and historians, and so I've been listening to them for a long time. And if I can just tell you what they actually are beginning to call him psychotic. That strong. Why? He's just a person who ran for office and got elected. He had his monetary. He's an economist, apparently. And he's very much pro the. It's kind of an old economics idea from the 1980s. Milton Friedman, you remember Margaret Thatcher. The trickle-down economics. Anyway, but whether he's right or wrong, he didn't lie. He said well before the election that is what he believed, and it was a good thing, and so on. Okay, and people voted for him. But there are other things that he said, and he did. Well, apparently he's in his 50s, he's unmarried, he has no children. A very close relationship with his sister, who is one of those seers, a tarot lady, and she lives with him in the presidential palace and so on. He had a dog in his apartment called Conan, and Conan died, but he had him cloned. And now he has 3. He had 3 in his apartment, living with him. And he used to say that he took his advice. This was before the election, not after. That he took advice from his dead dog. I suppose that you could say, well, that's a figure of speech or something. He doesn't mean it, but things continued on, and people seem to think that he is very much a broken man. And he is actually, not to belittle the point, actually, that he is perhaps, he has some mental issues. Why do they say that? He is at the point, the two things are not connected, but about 2 or 3 years ago, he started, well, first of all, that because he is a broken man, he says openly that he hates his parents. His parents are alive, but he absolutely hates them because of the suffering that they have imposed on him, physical and psychological. So I don't know what happened there, but he is suffering psychologically from whatever happened in his childhood. He wanted something to hold on to, and people, and commentators are saying, he was the sort of perfect person to be a member of a cult of some sort. So the sort of people that actually get recruited to this or that or the other particular cult, and they actually become true believers because they are so in need of affection and so on. You know what I'm talking about. So there's a certain rabbi, a Jewish rabbi, who met him about 2 or 3 years ago, and he is not. There are, as I understand it, there are two kinds of Orthodox Jews. The ones Orthodox Jews who are faithful to the Jewish religion and so on, and they are the ones who tell us, that what is happening in Israel is not according to their religion, and so on. But then there is another group, I forget the name now, the Vilovich or something like that they are the ones both in New York and also in the state of Israel who are urging for this sort of thing to continue because whatever reasons they might give. Okay, so Millet is following this particular rabbi. He has appointed him to go as Argentinian ambassador to Israel. Not only that, but the cultish thing is that, for example, when he sees an Israeli flag, he starts kissing it and even cries sometimes. And cries and kisses the flag. This is not natural. That's my point. It's not the Argentinian flag. I mean, even if it were the Argentinian flag, you don't start kissing it all over and crying. But he does that with the Israeli flag. At the same time, he has already promised them the Patagonia. He has already told them that it is open for them to whenever they need it. And he has also given the go-ahead to the United States to install a base right there at the very bottom, right in the south of Argentina. And of course, you can imagine that, I mean, this looks like a story, a made-up, silly thing, but you can imagine the political consequences that has. And a lot of people are very worried about this. So even people who voted for him because they thought, well, better than anybody, an outsider, rather than all these people who have done such a terrible job with the economy and everything else. And perhaps they thought that a lot of the things that he was saying and doing were a little bit of a, tongue-in-cheek or something like that. But it's beginning to look as if it's not so. He really means it. And in this case, perhaps it would be a case of betrayal of the country too, in my opinion. So, what can all these people say to their masters? I have done what you asked me to do. Service is rendered. Now we'll all have to think about how we are going to assume what is happening and acknowledge it, and then perhaps see what we can do about it. Thank you for listening. Bye-bye.